Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you all today. I want to begin by sharing a story. As Olivia said, I've traveled now in business and on speaking engagements to close to 30 countries around the world. And many years ago, when I was new to this, I had my first engagement in Paris, France. I was new enough to recognize or experienced enough back then to understand that different countries around Europe where I frequently traveled had different ways of greeting and saying hello and saying goodbye. For example, the British, where I hail from, are very comfortable with handshakes. That's, in a formal setting, the handshake was appropriate. However, if you went to Europe, in most countries, in a formal setting, if a man and woman were saying hello or goodbye, it would be appropriate to kiss twice, one on each cheek. Unless, of course, you're from the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, it was different. It would be 3 kisses. Then if you went to Scandinavia, they were less physically touchy-feely, and they were more comfortable with the handshake. If you went to Eastern Europe, if you were meeting, saying hello or goodbye to another man, and it was a formal setting, but you had a relationship, perhaps a rapport with that person, a relationship of trust, then maybe they would shake hands, but then they'd lean in and in a very macho way, they'd give you a shoulder bump and pat you on the back, which was very different again to what you'd experience in France. The French, of course, are quite well known. The men, if they say goodbye to each other, they're in a formal setting, but they've got that relationship of trust again, they're friends, they're colleagues. They might kiss each other on the cheek as well. All of these differences as a new traveler to these different markets would cause me confusion from time to time. And in many instances, I would immediately go out to shake a hand, only to find the other person leaning in to kiss me on the cheek, and would have this awkward kind of push me, pull you moment where we'd do this, and occasionally we'd almost kind of connect on the lips. And it was just disastrous and uncomfortable. So I established a rule for myself. I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. When I go to a new country, when I'm traveling, I'm going to look to my host, the local market host of that event. And whatever that person does, if they kiss twice, once on each cheek, then that's what I'll do. If they just stick to the handshake, I'll stick to the handshake. If they give a warm embrace, I'll give a warm embrace. If they give the shoulder bump, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to follow their lead. So anyway, like I said, I was in Paris, France. I was in a meeting. We'd had our keynote address. And after that meeting, I had a workshop with about 10 or 11 men where we were sat in a semicircle. There was me in the center and then a semicircle of men around me. As we got towards the end of the meeting, I thought to myself, how do I say goodbye in this situation? I'm in Paris. And that would suggest, do I kiss them on the cheek? Do I shake their hand? What do I do here? I wanted to make sure, of course, that I was culturally appropriate, whether it was men or women. You want it to be right. You don't want to mess it up. And so I looked to my colleague, and he was a gentleman in the corner of the room chatting with another gentleman. And as they finished their enthralling conversation, they were engrossed in each other's dialogue and in the chat. They kissed each other on the cheek and they said goodbye. And I thought to myself, okay, it looks like protocol here would be, if they are saying goodbye, that maybe I should kiss them on the cheek and say goodbye. But I got nervous. I wasn't used to that. And in my heart, I wanted to just do the handshake where I was comfortable. As we came to say goodbye, I thought to myself, I'm just going to go with what I know. I'm just going to shake hands. And then I thought, well, it could get uncomfortable. If he leans in to kiss me, then I'll lean in and I'll kiss him back. Maybe that's appropriate. But I'll work with that. I'll shake hands, but if he leans in, I'll lean in and kiss him. Well, as fate would have it, as we stood up and finished our meeting, all of these men, they all lined up in a big long line, this line of 10 or 11 men, all lined up to say goodbye to me one at a time. And as the first one came towards me to say goodbye, I put my hand out to shake his hand, and he leaned forward. So I thought, okay, I guess we're doing this. And I kissed him on the cheek. And as I did, I could see out of the corner of my eye he kind of leaned back as though to say, what are you doing? What was that? Right. And I was horrified. I was like, that was really uncomfortable. Clearly, this is not socially or culturally acceptable. And it was so uncomfortable, I didn't have the courage to do what French culture would suggest I should do, which would be kiss the other cheek. So I just pulled back and did nothing. It was horrific. And then I looked to my right and I looked at all these men lined up and they looked at me as though to say, what was that? Is that what we're doing? And in this awkward moment, they all very kindly deferred to me as their coach and mentor, because I've just conducted this workshop and thought, if that's what Ben wants to do, I guess that's what we're doing. And so one at a time, they all awkwardly and uncomfortably leaned in and allowed me to kiss them on the cheek. And it was just this horrific, horrible ordeal of saying goodbye. And as they all went, it seemed to drag on. Time just dragged. And as time went on, they eventually we said goodbye, they left. And I was like, why was that so horrific? I thought the social cultural thing to do in France was that men kiss each other on the cheek. Goodbye. That's what my friend did. That's what my colleague did. Why was this so uncomfortable to me? And then the penny dropped. It was uncomfortable because they weren't French. They were Polish. That first man that leaned in wasn't leaning in to kiss me. He was leaning in to say, hey, we're friends, we're colleagues. I'm going to give you a shoulder bump. And instead of the shoulder bump, I said, yes, we are friends. And I kissed him on the cheek instead. And he was like, steady on. And then everyone else got on board with it. Now, why do I share this as I start our meeting today? A couple of reasons. One, of course, I think if there's anyone in this room today that has said to themselves over this past year, oh, have you felt that Zoom fatigue kick in yet? Have you ever gotten tired of virtual meetings? Then rest assured, there are always silver linings to such occasions. You certainly won't come across young, inexperienced travelers looking for long lines of people that they feel they need to kiss goodbye. You're not going to get that in a virtual event. So rest assured, Zoom fatigue doesn't need to be something that many people experience. There is great benefits that come from meeting together virtually. But of course, there's a deeper, more important reason that I wish to share with you today. And that is how this connects with some of the many challenges that we face. And you might think, how is there a connection here to the challenges that we face? On a regular, consistent basis as we're dealing with challenge or adversity. I've got to ask you the question, why didn't I stop after that first awkward kiss? Why didn't I stop there and go, hang on a second, that felt awkward. What are we doing here? How do we say goodbye? How are you saying goodbye? Have I got this wrong? And then the rest of us could laugh, we could joke it off, and we could move on. I didn't do that. I dug my heels. I thought, this is what I'm committed to. This is what we're doing here. So I'm not changing. We carried it all the way through. The challenge for many of us when we're dealing with adversity or crisis in many instances is we get stuck in what is called the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is where we remain committed to a task, to a project, to an assignment, to a way of living, believing, behaving, thinking, acting, long after the value of that task or project or way of living has provided value to us. How many of you have invested in something and then found that it's not working the way it should? We need to let go, we need to pivot, but if I do, I lose all that money. All of that time that we put in is time that is now gone and wasted. But what happens if you don't let go and change? For too many people, one of the challenges when we're in the midst of crisis, change, or the need to transform, hold on too preciously to things they need to let go of. One of my points here, as you can see, is I talk about in my book 7 essential virtues, vital virtues, where we can turn struggle into strength. One of them being willful surrender. Now, surrender sounds like giving up or giving in. It's not. Surrender is perhaps one of the bravest, most courageous virtues of all, because it requires us to confront reality, to put our egos to one side and to acknowledge the incorrect beliefs that we hold right now about ourselves, about our circumstances, and about our futures. So what we need to do as a starting point is have a willingness to let go. How does that feel? Ooh, that can take your breath away, can't it? But as we're willing to do that, then we put ourselves in a position where transformation and change can truly happen. But it starts really with that willingness up front, that courage and bravery to let go of that sunk cost fallacy, to see things as they really are and to move forwards and to be willing to pivot and not sink yourself with the commitment to kiss the rest of the guys in the line when you don't need to be doing that. I want to share an interesting statistic when it comes to transformation. Gallup did a really interesting survey over the course of 3 years, and they discovered when it came to employee, the workplace environment. I want to ask you a question in order to address this. If you were to give a percentage to the number of people in a work environment that were highly engaged and happy in the workplace, highly engaged, what would you say that percentage would be? You may want to put it in the chat if you wish. It'd be interesting to see your feedback. But this is a scary and startling number. They ran the survey over 3 years. The global average of highly engaged workers was 15%. 15%. Now in North America, fortunately, it's a better number, it's 31%, but that still represents roughly 70% of the workforce that feel less engaged, are low performing, and are dissatisfied or miserable in some degree. What does that represent? That means that there is a significant amount of lost work, time, resources, profitability, and potential for growth as a consequence. Now, I share that because of this slide right here. The most important thing that they found in their survey was not employee satisfaction. It was employee development. And that this statement rang true as the most important thing of all. There is someone at work who encourages my development. When we have that as a forefront of our responsibility as leaders in our workplace, leaders in driving change and transformation in our work environment, that has to ring very high, very true, very fast. People are front and center. Now, of course, one of the reasons that they're disengaged is because people don't like change. Change is uncomfortable and unpleasant. But if we can learn to empower people, then we shift something that is critical. Yeah, we've all heard that saying, a program imposed is a program opposed. Yeah. So if we empower others and help them to engage and participate in that transformation journey, then all of a sudden it's no longer imposed, it's their ideas, it's their contributions. And then we get so much more achieved as a result of that group participation. So I want to share an example of this when I was, again, a number of years ago as a general manager of a couple of markets of a multi-billion-dollar company, a health and wellness company. We had an internal vacancy that had come available, and we had a number of external applicants. We had one internal applicant that applied for the job. It was a low-ranking position, a sales coordinator role. And the person that applied came from the customer services department. I sat down with my HR manager and I said to her, Karen, I'm not going to interview this person that applied for the job. I'm not going to interview her. And she said, well, you've got to, Ben, because our policies require every internal applicant has to be given the right to interview. I said, well, that's unfair because I know she's not going to get the job. So I'm not going to interview her. That would be giving her false expectations and false hopes. I'm not going to do that. And she said, well, you're kind of bucking policy here. I said, well, I think it's only fair. And she said, well, if that's the case, and if you're stuck on that decision, then I want you to tell her. It's not going to be me. This lady, her name was Anne, was known for being a little abrasive, bristly, and intimidating to some people in the office. She said, I'm not telling her, you tell her. And I said, okay, I can do that. I called her into my office and asked her to sit down. I said, Anne, I understand that you've applied for the position of sales coordinator. Well, she immediately sat up. You could tell she was feeling a little chuffed with herself. I've been invited to the general manager's office. He's already talking to me about this. Smile on her face. You know, she was getting a little excited. And I said, I'm sorry, Anne. I just wanted to let you know I'm not going to interview you for the position. You would not get the job. She looked stunned. You could see all of a sudden she kind of fell back in her seat. I don't understand. Why not? I said, you have an advantage, Anne, over every other person that is applying for this position because you're the only internal applicant. I see you at work every day. I said, this position requires going the extra mile, using initiative, not clocking in and doing the 9 to 5, but maybe doing later hours, maybe doing weekend work. It requires going above and beyond. I don't ever see you doing that. You clock in at 9, you clock out at 5, you don't use initiative, you wait to be told. I said, I can't have someone like that in this position. So I'm sorry, you've got an advantage, you didn't take it. So I can't give you the position. Well, she broke down and cried right there in my office. It was a difficult moment. I gave her some time to compose herself. She left the room, went out to our smoking area outside. She was a heavy smoker and probably smoked a few cigarettes. After composing herself, she came back into my office and I braced myself. I thought, okay, maybe now she's got some thoughts that she's going to share with me and it's going to be a little uncomfortable. We're going to have a difficult conversation. It was quite the opposite. It turned out to be one of the highlights of my career as an employer. She came back to me and she said, Ben, can I please see you again? I said, sure, come on in and sit down. She said, first of all, I want to apologize for crying in your office before and for losing my composure and my presence of mind. That was unacceptable. I said, hey, I understand. I get it. It was tough words, hard to hear. And then she said, the best question that I've ever heard asked, like I said, as an employer, she said, Ben, what would you have me do? What would you have me do? And I said, Anne, this is music to my ears. I gave her a list of things to do and told her, gave her the assurance that I would see and acknowledge and recognize when these things are happening. I then went to her boss who reported into me and I said, please, every time she uses initiative, every time she stays late, every time she does this or that, I want you to report back to me and let me know so I can see it, hear it, and give her some chance for feedback. I did that. A few months later, we had another internal vacancy appear, this time in our events department. I didn't advertise that position. I got the document that had the job description and I called her into my office and I said, Anne, we have a new vacancy in our position, in our company for an events coordinator within our sales team. I said, I'm not going to advertise this position. It's yours if you want it. This time she broke down and cried again, but for all the right reasons. She had earned it. She had qualified herself. She made it count. And I loved that. It was one of those great moments where, as a consequence of empowering her, she stood up, rose up, and became something different. After that, she came in, she dressed different when she came to work. She groomed herself better. She stood taller. She had more confidence. She engaged more, and she participated and contributed to a higher level because I had her back. I empowered her, and she grew out as a consequence, and the business flourished as a result of that type of effort. Moving on from that, as we recognize transformation is all about people, it always begins with us. Now, this challenge, just really quickly as an aside, for many leaders, the challenge is always navigating people versus process. I got that drastically wrong in my first experience, didn't I? I was so concerned with cultural process, I forgot about the people I was working with. I'd been talking to them for 45 minutes. I knew that they had Eastern European accents. I totally forgot about that because I was preoccupied with process. What does protocol suggest? Now, what's interesting is Neural imaging studies have shown that the operational skills in our brain, when they are employed, means that the social skills in our brain, which is that come from and function in a different part, slow down. They work like a tug of war, like a seesaw. And as one engages, the other one slows down. When the other one picks up, the other one slows down. And they fight against each other, which means as leaders of ourselves, because this certainly applies in a home environment. I've got a family of 10. Operational excellence, social harmony certainly applies in the home place, in the home life, as well as in the workplace. We've got to find balance in there and find a way of learning how to get that balance right. It doesn't always happen easy. Now, of course, as it says here, nothing begins without one's real desire for it to begin in the first place. The starting point for any meaningful change, like I said, has to be a willingness to let go of our preconceived notions of what is incorrect, let go of our false beliefs. But then we come to the next point where we need to have a desire, a meaningful desire to make a change. I might be able to acknowledge that something is uncomfortable or unpleasant. I might be able to acknowledge that we need to make a change. But the critical thing is then, do I want to? I mentioned in our group chat before this meeting that people aren't willing to change in most instances until the pain of the problem becomes greater than the pain of the solution. That's quite problematic, isn't it? But if we can find a way to build that belief and that desire, starting with small steps. So we begin, first of all, by seeing and being able to identify and interpret what does this crisis or this need for transformation truly bring to us? What can we do as a result of this that will allow us, enable us, empower us to be better as a result? Because often this is where change and transformation and new growth opportunities are born. It's in these moments of difficulty and chaos, crisis and change. That's really where it begins. So the first step is we want to desire. We need to desire. For many, the challenge becomes, what if I don't desire it enough? What if I'm not hurting enough? What if I don't want it enough? How do I move forward then? And I say this perhaps in a personal situation, from a personal perspective. We can recognize and appreciate the value of desire, but the great challenge for many is lacking it. How do I move forward then if my desires are inadequate? We have to start small. We have to start small. I was at a meeting a number of years ago with a group of entrepreneurs, this time in Birmingham, England. And we were talking about, in order to really thrive and succeed, you've got to have a compelling why. And if you've got that compelling why, you'll always find a how. We're saying, so what are your whys? What are your reasons for being here? And one lady shared her experience, which was, I've just overcome this terminal illness. And as a result, my business, which is a health business, health-centered business, it just drives me, motivates me to really make a difference with other people and inspire them to appreciate their good health. And you could see her eyes were sparkling and glowing. She was radiant with enthusiasm and excitement. And the lady behind her put her arm up. Yeah, she was cross-armed at first, looking a little bit frustrated. She puts her arm up. I've got a concern with that, she said. I said, oh, really? What's the concern? She said, well, I've never had a terminal illness. She said, I'm not saying I want one. She said, but and often in these situations, we hear these big reasons, these big whys that motivate people to do big things. I don't have a big why. She said, I feel like a big tree with little roots. I want to have a big why. I want to achieve great things, but I'm not feeling it as much as I know I should. What do I do about that? I said, that's a profound question. I asked the audience, how many people feel like this? About 80% of the people put their hand up. I said, well, the answer is in the metaphor that you used. If your vision, if your why is your roots, your vision is your branches, and your why really takes time to grow. It doesn't happen overnight. Yeah, we can get offshoots grow pretty quickly, but the roots really take time to nurture. And this law of the harvest is something that really needs to be applied here. We don't plant a seed in one day and pluck the fruit from the tree the next. We need to nurture and tend the garden. We need to recognize that sometimes that seed is going to feel like it's completely buried by the dirt. It gets no sunlight. It's covered in manure, but that's for a season. It's for a season. But if we continue to tend it, pluck out the weeds that are around it, it will eventually start to grow. What does that look like for our mind? It means we nourish it. We take good care of it. We recognize and interpret and evaluate our circumstances with a little bit more clarity than simply dealing with the pain of the problem and misinterpreting that for what it is. It requires us to really put in some effort and work hard. I made the mistake as I was really starting to take off and accelerate in my career. I had a few people would come to me and say, wow, you've achieved so much, and you've got such a big family. How do you do it all? And I used to say, wrongly and arrogantly, I might add, I might not be the smartest person around, but I'll outwork anyone. And I put it down to that. I will outwork anyone. And for a season, I thought that was why I was thriving and succeeding in my career. Perhaps you've heard other people talk about that. Certainly in the entrepreneurial environment, that word hustle is a buzzword right now, isn't it? It's all about the hustle. Now, let's look at Picasso for just a second. Before his breakthrough piece of work, he had worked for 20 years and produced over 7,000 pieces. He worked hard, but that wasn't it alone. Yes, he obviously worked very hard. Yes, he had some skills that went with it, but he also had connections. His family also connected him with great teachers, great people that he could learn from. Likewise, Mozart, incredible musician, Beethoven likewise, but his parents put him in touch with great teachers and tutors. It's important to recognize in our pursuit of transformation and change. And that's why this meeting, particularly meetings like this, are so critical and so important, is yes, skills play a part. Our work ethic plays a part. But even if we're one in a million, with all of our skill and all of our ability, we're 1 in a million, there's still 1,000 other people out there on the planet just like you. So what's going to differentiate? How do we make that change? How do we transform as a consequence? If there's all of that sense of competition, our connections, who we're connected with. We've heard it said, it's not what you know, it's who you know that counts. I want to tell you that's incorrect. It's not who you know that counts. It's who knows you that matters. And critically, what do they know you for? What do they know you for? What kind of person are you? Why would they want to connect with you? We've got to work and take time on establishing that too. And build those connections, build those relationships, because in reality, when we are struggling, and I will say this on a personal level as well as on a commercial level, when we struggle, if I'm hurting with a particular pain point, our tendency is to self-isolate, isn't it? And to hide. We talked again a little bit about this in the chat groups. We all have this facade that we put on. How you doing? Doing fine. Doing great. But behind the facade, I'm overwhelmed. I can't cope. This is too much. I'm struggling. I don't know what to do. There's all of that inner dialogue, inner monologue that's going on, and we don't know how to respond to it. But we keep it to ourselves because we want to give this illusion that we're something else, and we want to keep up the appearance. The reality is, if we really want to be strong and achieve our full potential, our best potential, the paradox lies in the truth that our greatest potential is never found in isolation, in us working at something by ourselves. We become our best when we work in teams and when we work together, be it personally or whether it be in a commercial environment. We need to see the value of that interactivity and those connections. So perhaps have a consideration right now as to how over the last 12 months have you nurtured your relationships. We've had some challenges, haven't we, in doing that by nature of a pandemic. Perhaps has caused some people to connect more and to connect differently. But nonetheless, this has to remain a critical priority for all of us as we go through our transformation journey. We need to look at, again, the importance of that connection and building those relationships. I love this quote here by Shakespeare. How poor are they who have not patience? What wound did ever heal but by degrees? It's so true, isn't it? The journey for transformation, I want to emphasize this, is really important, is simple. It is recognized in that it is just that. It's a journey. There is a stark difference between change and transformation. Change can happen quickly, and it can happen with the stroke of a pen. A finance manager, for example, can allocate a certain amount of budget to a project or not. We can relocate things in a house or in a room and move one person from one bedroom to another. That happens. That's a change. It happens quickly. But to change a paradigm, that's a journey. It's not an event. It's not a moment. It happens over time. And the reality is, any transformation journey that a company goes through, that an organization goes through, that an industry goes through, it's a journey, not a singular moment in time. So we're not talking about change. We're talking about transformation. And at the heart of that, people need to transform in order for them to then be empowered to transform the business. My mindsets, my paradigms need to shift in order for that to happen. So in order for that to happen, we need to recognize that that journey is painful. At the top level, this is what I've found, and maybe those of you that are senior executives listening in right now will appreciate this. At a high-ranking level, the journey of transformation looks exciting. We're going to revolutionize the way our company works, and we're going to transform this and that, and it's going to be incredibly exciting. We're going to be the first out in our field that do this. We're going to lead the way, and it's great. At the grassroots, people might be losing their jobs as their position becomes irrelevant. Now, all of a sudden, that change, that's transformation for you, that's change for them. That's different, that's painful. Now, all of a sudden, this person's job looks different. Now their job description has changed. Now my function involves moving in this direction, and for years I've been over here doing that. I'm uncomfortable with that, but I need to do it, otherwise I lose my job, or maybe there is threat or vulnerability in my position or my skill set. And so there's, at the grassroots level, it's uncomfortable and it's difficult and it's challenging. So we need to recognize that as we work through that journey of transformation, but understand the role of patience. I've always found it hard, and again, I use this in a personal context. When someone says, I understand that this is tough, but be patient. You can do this. We'll get there, right? How do you develop patience when you don't have any? That's the hard thing. These virtues we need in order to transform. We need patience, because any journey that is long develops a different set of skills than the journey that is short. If it's painful, but it's brief in time, we get through it. But if it's long, all of a sudden my perspective changes, doesn't it? How does that work then? When it's a long or chronic transformation journey that is painful and unpleasant and difficult, how do I exercise patience then? Well, research has shown us that when we engage our imaginations in a scenario such as that our ability to exercise patience increases. If we can take ourselves, because the challenge is, if I don't engage my patience, then what happens is I focus my attention on the proximity of my pain. And when I focus on the proximity of my pain, which is right here and now, right in front of me, then the challenge that I face is I use typically willpower and grit to get my way through it, which will only have so much limit. But if I engage my imagination, I take my mind and my heart outside of the proximity of my personal pain to a future state where a greater outcome, a better outcome is envisioned. And when I can envision a better outcome and see a brighter, clearer horizon in the future, and I can see that in my mind's eye, then all of a sudden, my capacity to endure with patience the chronic suffering and struggle that I'm experiencing is increased. So it's important for us as we deal with our personal struggles and as we look at the corporate transformation we may need to endure or go through, that we all get on board with what is the vision that we're working towards? What am I hoping to achieve? And when we can appreciate that and hold to that, remember that, keep that front and center, then we can have greater strength and capacity to move forwards comfortably and confidently towards our goals. Another critical virtue, and this is a virtue that I'm confident all of you are already well versed and well exercised in, an educated mind. They say that knowledge is power. Yeah, but what you're seeing here is an image, a representation of what Dr. Viktor Frankl refers to as dimensional ontology. I'm not sure if you've heard of this before, but dimensional ontology is basically explaining that you've got what you have here is three separate objects: a cylinder, a sphere, and a cone, and a globe. A cylinder, a cone, sorry, and a globe. From one angle, as the light is cast below them from above, directly onto it, like a sun at noonday, its shadow beneath it creates the same image. It all looks the same, circular. However, if you rise to a higher level and see the shapes for what they really are, then all of a sudden you can have a different understanding of what you're dealing with. And this is what dimensional ontology is all about, is that in many instances, we can experience pain, suffering, challenge, or adversity, but it can create similar or common symptomatology of suffering and discomfort. And as a result of that, we don't quite know how to respond and act differently to resolve our concerns. What is a solution? Leveling up our learning. We need to really commit on a constant basis to improving our performance. It's been said, it's my personal commitment, at least, that the phrase continuous improvement has to rank top of mind all the time. Continuous improvement. We need to be always looking for ways to grow our minds, to change and improve our hearts, because again, referring back to the chat group, for many people, the reason they find transformation hard, especially as they get older, is because they get stuck in paradigms that they've held onto and beliefs and ideas and behaviors that they've held onto for many years that no longer serve them. We've got to be willing to adapt and respond to new ways of being, because what we have learned definitely over this last 12 months is that the world is more fragile than what we thought it was. We knew it was fragile, but boy, it hit us last year, didn't it? We felt it personally, intimately last year. And we're still going through that this year, and we will continue to, I believe, for some time to come as we make this transformation happen. But the way through that is to level up our learning and to continually ask the questions, why, how, what can I do differently, and engage with creativity, connect with others, because of course, leveling up our learning isn't something that we do in isolation either. We get our teams to work together in that commitment and invest in their futures and education as well. I want to share just a couple of final thoughts as we conclude here. I want to ask you what you see as you look at this picture. It might sound like a stupid question, but this is, amongst all of the points that I've made today, a desire to emphasize the one thing that matters most in my message today. And I hope you've been making notes. I hope you've been writing down ideas, things that you might want to do differently. What might you want to let go of that is causing you pain, or that is no longer serving you or your business or your personal life as much as it should be? What do you need to let go of? What do you need to change? Who do I need to connect with? I hope you're making notes on that and making some commitments. But this is at the heart of it. What do you see here? Now, it looks like a forest. The answer is, well, yes and no. It is a forest that you see, but what you also see is one single tree. It's called the pando tree, and it is in fact the largest, oldest living organism on the planet. It covers 106 acres, nearly 6,000 metric tons, more than 40,000 trunks that each live about 130 years. But as a single living organism, it's over 80,000 years old. Why? Because it shares a singular connected root system. A single connected root system. It makes it one thing. Now, the metaphor here, the parallel is our strength is increased dramatically when we connect together. When we try to do things in isolation, we will not have the same power and strength as if we were to connect together. My invitation above everything today is that we look for ways to nurture and network, nurture our relationships, network together, because in the process, not only do we contribute more, but collectively we contribute and achieve so much more as a result. So one final slide and then I'm done. Key actions. Avoid the sunk cost fallacy. Stop committing to things that no longer serve you. Don't go around looking for those long lines of men that you feel you need to keep on kissing when you can stop. Stop and pivot. Stop and pivot. Don't do that. It's painful, it's uncomfortable, and I promise you it's much better if you stop sooner rather than later. Demonstrate to those around you that people development is your number one priority. Nurture your connections, like I just said. Your network is as valuable to you as your skills and your work ethic. Engage your imagination to improve your patience when things are going tough. Understand and envision that preferred ideal outcome that you're working towards to engage your patience when your willpower is not enough. Get creative, level up your learning, and like I said, remember, we're always stronger when we work together. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of your event today. I hope you've had a wonderful experience. I hope that this has contributed in a meaningful way to allow you to level up and to overcome whatever you're working through in order to become more. Thank you.